Welcome back, Rich Life listeners. Lane and Paul are here today. We're going to be discussing how to survive a bad investment or downturn without losing yourself. Something that every seasoned investor has definitely gone up and down. I've had my fair share of these things. I'd probably say lucky enough to maybe see two downturns in my lifetime. Although the first one I didn't really have much money, so
Hmm.
maybe call it a half. But yeah, that's the topic that we are just going into depth today.
Yeah, and I thought this was a pertinent topic because recently I was on a client call with somebody who had been sitting on this for a while. I didn't bring it up for probably over a year and a half because of this sense of shame of a couple of investments that didn't go well, and also there's this sense of isolation and being alone. And I thought if this person that I was coaching was sitting on this for so long, then there's probably a lot of other folks out there who are dealing with something similar.
Yeah, and that's you hit it on the head with that. That person had somebody to talk to. That's, I think, the value of a coach, but
Yeah.
also your friends, family can be that person for you. Sometimes it just makes sense to unload things.
Yeah.
I personally don't share those types of things with my friends or family or close ones because it'll just bring them down. And sometimes you're in a situation and where people just don't understand things as you do, or they can't even fathom things.
Yeah.
If you're, especially for business owners out there, feel this all the time. I think that's why it's important to have a similar peer group as you that are in the same, in the wartime trenches with you, as they say. But yeah, I think that's where social relationships are the currency of the wealthy, and also you draw on this piggy bank in these tough times that inevitably happen.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that's something that we're gonna talk about more is it's just so important to have someone to talk to, or at least someone neutral, because when there are setbacks, what I've noticed is that there is shame associated with it, as I mentioned. There's this sort of self-imposed isolation, there's self-blame, there's loss of confidence, there's fear of trying again or dipping your feet back in. And all these things, they can lead to this sort of vicious cycle of not trusting yourself to take calculated risks again, and it can really set you back, right? When it really ultimately does come down to mindset. And do you use it as an opportunity? Do you use it as a learning experience, or do you let it define you? So I feel like with this topic that there's actually so much to talk about.
What you last said is entirely true, but it's very difficult when you're in the moment, whether that
Hmm.
moment is 5 months or 5 years. It's definitely easier said than done. But I would just start off saying that this is part of the very standard grief cycle, not to
Hmm.
downplay it at all, of course. Typically, when there's any type of loss, whether a death or loss of monetary value. You go through that shock phase, the denial phase, and then some people go through an anger phase. Some people yell and scream. Then you go through this bargaining where you're trying to figure out fact finding. What happened? Where did things go wrong? Where did I maybe overlook things? Where can we blame other people potentially? Some people are like that.
Yeah.
And then I think what you were mentioning there, what I was keen on that case, Paul, was the depression stage, which is usually maybe even months into
Mhm.
this. And then you get to a point of acceptance after that. Some people can get stuck in these later stages, which is the bargaining stage, depression stage, and never really reach acceptance. And one thing that I've learned recently, talking within my CEO groups, a lot of people have employees or people in their immediate circle. You start to realize that it is pretty typical for people to go through what they call these crucible moments in life, where an average person has one of these crucible moments every 6 to 9 months. I think you, Paul, you're pretty stable family unit, pretty stable family. Like guys like you will typically not go through these crucible moments as frequently, but still every few years something throws a curveball. But people go through these crucible moments very commonly, and that's why I think it's important as a business owner, employer, or if you're just a manager who people roll up to, you never know what people are going through, and they could be going through their darkest days and you never know it, and maybe being there for them. But just understand it, you never know what people are going through, but more than likely they're going through something, right? The average
Yeah.
person goes through this multiple times a year, and some of it might be brought on by themselves, but they all go through it. But it becomes a T in life. You can either take the high road and get stronger for it, or you could crumble and become a blamer, this victim mentality. And quite frankly, I think most people head down that road.
I have to agree with you on that one, that unfortunately, I think in some ways it's easier to head down that road, right? To focus on the external factors that might have led to an unfortunate result when oftentimes it's a lot more gray. Things are a lot more nuanced, right? And there's always opportunities to figure out, okay, what went right, but also what if things did go poorly, where does the responsibility lie, right? And oftentimes it's usually the easier to focus on an external source and then place the blame on that. But it is important to recognize that there is an opportunity here, not only for learning, for not only for troubleshooting, but to grow from it, to be better and to be resilient from it.
Maybe here's the way I look at financial loss.
Mm.
The way I look at investing, you play your cards and you put it out there and you make a goal for it and you swing the bat. I think the closest thing I can think of is like poker. And I know poker is gambling,
Mm.
right? But people who are intimate into it and do it a lot of times will tell you it's a game of percentages. If you have a two of a pair, your percent of winning the pot is 65 to 75%. The full house is 95%. Four of a kind is 99%. And a pair of sixes is like 35 to 45%, all relatively speaking here. Certain times you have a better hand, and obviously you're playing other people, but certain hands you go for it. If you, I think blackjack, are you one of these guys when you get like the 20, what is it?
21.
The
Uh-huh.
ace and the you double down on it if you're showing an ace card and something
Mm.
else. Or showing an 11. If you got an 11,
Yeah.
you double down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The odds they do that every time. Similarly in poker, it's same dynamic. And I think the same thing with investing, right? You go into a deal, you see what the macroeconomics are, what is going on internally, microeconomics and the actual investment, and you play the hand. And there's certain things that you have no control over.
Yeah, I like that analogy because it reminds me of this idea that you can at the time you could have made like actually a really good decision with the information you had on hand, but still have an unfortunate result, right? Like you were talking about the percentages with poker. There are some hands where you should play because more often than not the odds are going to be in your favor, right? And so in that moment, it's the absolute right decision to make, right? But there's times like 5%, whatever the odds are, that, hey, you did the logical thing, you did the right thing with the information you had at hand, but just bad luck. You were in that 5% of the time where you ended up with a unfortunate result, even though you played the right hand and you actually made the right decision at the time. Conversely, there are times when people speculate or they make actually poor investment decisions, but they end up with a good result. So the opposite also happens, and then they'll think, "Oh my gosh, I'm a genius."
That's the bias, right? When good
Yeah,
events happen,
yeah,
you take it upon to confirm your bias that you're a great investor,
yeah,
great person. And when bad things, you repel it.
yeah.
Some people in that use case earlier are very hard on themselves. And I think I've mentioned this. Some people are, they're confident in what they can do, but they're mean to themselves. And I think
Mm,
this is the one way it manifests itself. So if you're somebody who, when things happen and beat yourself up, you're your worst enemy, you may have a higher propensity to go down this road. So it's good to be aware of it.
yeah, and I think with a lot of these like, sophisticated investors that we see, a lot of them, a lot of us, it almost becomes part of. Sometimes we have this tendency to make it like part of our identity, right? So when things go south, or like an investment doesn't turn out the way that we hoped it would, we can be hard on ourselves, right? And really blame ourselves, and that can make things just tougher overall.
Right. One thing we know for certain is if your mind is in the dumps, you will be a lot less effective or totally ineffective for all we know. We know that is for a fact.
Yeah,
So why even put yourself in that situation? Again,
right.
easier said than done. But that
Yeah.
was a realization that I got from my coach when I was feeling blue. And sometimes it takes a good coach to sometimes in those cases be forceful. It's not a physical slap in the face, but it's come on, man. This is what's going to happen if you keep down this path. You got to do something about it.
Yeah, and for high achievers, high performers, I mean, oftentimes they're used to being like the competent one, right? Or maybe they really have this role as the financial guarantor or the provider for the family. And there's definitely this very real risk that their self-worth takes a hit whenever there's an economic downturn or the investments don't go very well. It's important to realize and recognize this emotional side of financial loss because that's just as important, if not more important, than like actually reviewing what's going on the spreadsheet.
And ironically, it's those high achievers are often the ones that have faced the least amount of losses and strikeouts along the way, that they
Mm.
have the least amount of practice
Yeah.
pulling themselves out of the mental dumps. So that's rather unfortunate. How many times has Victor Wembanyama gotten blocked? Not that many times, I bet. It's the same situation in a way.
Yeah. I thought we could touch just for a moment on why it hurts to lose money. I figured I'd go over just a little bit of the neuroscience behind it here, just to talk about that angle. So research shows that like the emotional impact of losing, let's say, $10,000 is actually 2 to 3 times greater than the joy of making $10,000. So in other words, your pain is 2 to 3 times stronger than gain. And we've talked about like a similar concept on some of our podcasts where we talk about relationships, how a negative interaction usually requires at least like 3 positive experiences just to cancel it out. So in much the same way, whenever we lose money, we actually feel it much, much worse. It's sort of amplified in our brain. And there's an evolutionary and a biological reason for this is because our brains are designed to actually protect us from danger, right? And whenever we experience financial loss, our brain treats that as a risk, as danger. And so that's why we tend to amplify negative experiences, includes financial loss. Once that
I've
happens,
seen this echoed in a few different other psychology studies too, where
mm,
they'll ask people in this hypothetical gambling exercise,
mhm,
like, how much would you wager to win this?
mm,
And they also include that dynamic of what if you lost $10 to get this? And then this the same exact ratios you're mentioning also shows up, which essentially just solidifies your argument, which is to lose something, people have a lot more aversion. They call this loss aversion, right?
yeah,
The law of
yeah,
loss aversion,
yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? And when we face financial loss, then our body treats this as danger, right, essentially. When we sense danger, then our cortisol levels spike, and when our cortisol levels spike, we tend to have tunnel vision. We're not able to really see or appreciate the big picture, right? Because again, your brain is prioritizing survival, not clarity. And the part of the brain that's actually the most rational decision maker, that's the prefrontal cortex, it goes offline when we're under stress, right? When our cortisol level rises. So that just makes the problem even worse because now we're in this sort of fight or flight mode, right? And this is why in times of stress, you see a lot of investors, they'll either panic sell, like they'll overcorrect, right? Some folks freeze or do nothing. Some become withdrawn from people and friends, right? These are all different, but they're all very like human reactions to stress, right? Because that's how our brains and developed over the years to handle danger. And even though we're no longer living in caves, but our brains are still operating the same way. It's ultimately meant to protect us. But I think it is important to recognize how our brains operate because we do want to get above that. We do want to be able to look at ourselves from a bird's eye view so that we can make those more intelligent decisions.
Yeah. That's overlays in the stages of grief, right? Like the
Yeah.
anger that you meant is
Mhm.
typically an earlier stage, right after shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then a lot of those more depression, isolation, loss of confidence happens after the
Yeah.
bargaining, the fact-finding stage, and then right before acceptance. So
Yeah.
I've definitely been on the brunt of this myself. And these are just the natural stages people go, and it fully transparently shows which stages of acceptance journey you're on,
Yeah.
that it is totally justified that people do things. It's not right. It is
Yeah.
definitely not right, but it's totally justified. And I understand that need to go through these types of stages.
Yeah, totally. And most investors don't talk about this part, but almost everyone who's experienced some sort of loss goes through it. So we mentioned things like shame, you mentioned anger. There's also rumination, right? Playing about like Monday night quarterback, like replaying every decision,
But
right?
that's the fact finding
Yeah.
stage in the
Yeah.
middle there.
Catastrophizing, right? We did a previous episode on cognitive biases, right? So an example of catastrophizing is, oh my gosh, is my financial future ruined? right? Is my retirement down the drain? You have isolation, right? Some people isolate themselves due to shame to avoid this fear of being judged, right? Loss of confidence, right? Especially if you really tie your identity to what you're doing with, say, investing, right? Now, all of a sudden, you're doubting your ability to invest. It can also cause relationship strain, right? And we know that one of the top reasons for divorce and separation is finances, right? So if the money that was invested was joint, but let's say like you were the one who made the decision, that in a lot of cases could lead to blame. It could lead to a lot of negative emotions. So these are common things that they're not all of them, but for anyone listening who has experienced any of these, you're definitely not alone, and it is not a sign that you're weak. It's just along with the stages of grief, these are natural like emotional arcs of loss.
And I know we're talking about these stages as distant in a way, a
Mm,
third party to it, and it does seem a little bit insensitive in a way. It is important if you are going through it to maybe self-diagnose which stage you're in, and to that know that what you're going through is totally natural.
yeah.
You know, the stages of isolation and loss of confidence is very scary point because this is where people can go off the rails. I've seen firsthand suicide in this circumstance,
Mm,
people getting divorced. That's just par for the course at this point. It just puts pressure where pressure there was there already. If I were to back up one step in the fact-finding place, the one thing I see is when people start to, at this point, think it's crazy. Things are emotions and
mm,
ideas are going all over the place. My only suggestions, at least going through myself, is try and stay away from the two extreme ends. So the one extreme ends would be being very incredibly hard on yourself. If you stay on that side of the gutter, you'll probably be, this is where being depressed, getting that rare case of suicide, right? If that's you, call 911, right? If you're on the other side of push, some people push this off. The ego is very good at repelling things that don't verify itself. And this could turn into blaming other people. And this is what essentially it does. It shields you from any type of blame. Even though it may not be your fault, I think it's important that you take somewhat of a
mm,
self look at this and what can you learn from this? This could be the best day from the future. You don't want to hear that now. Let's take a different case, right? We all have that friend who's never found love in life and they just happen to always date the wrong guy or gal, right? Just they just
mm,
tend to
yeah.
be attracted to just garbage people, toxic people. And some of these people, again, it's different circumstance, but the same thing here because it's a loss in loss of romantic relationship. In this case, where you see a lot, some people they shield their ego and they say it's always them. We all know third party that it's both of you guys. He was a jerk for sure. But this is
Yeah.
partially your fault too.
Yeah.
And this we can see it in this clear example because we've seen it in some of our peers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But go with me here. This is similar to investment loss. In a way, if you're like, you don't take any type of ownership over the situation, you're just gonna be that girl who just keeps dating these garbage men out there. It's no different.
Yeah.
Again and again. It'll shield your ego and make you feel really good in the meantime. It'll probably make you feel a lot better and not go down this depression
Mhm.
angle. That's good on one end. But again, I think you got to stay in the middle of the fairway here and accept some of this pain and torment too, because that's the path to enlightenment. No, just kidding. Just,
Yeah.
but I think that's where I think it becomes more of a healthy recovery.
I agree. And I think that's a really difficult thing for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But I think
And that
ultimately,
girl trying to meet that right guy, that's a tough situation too, right?
yeah, it reminds me of some of those people that the problem is always with the people they meet. The problem is always with the other person, and then you want to say, I wonder what the common denominator is here.
Yeah, you and I joke about this now, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes insensitive. But
Yeah.
again, it's just really hard when you're in the moment and you're the one either beating yourself up or pointing the finger at everybody else because
Yeah.
you're shielding your ego. And that's what the ego does. And I try to catch myself all the time because I know I do it too. I'm probably just as guilty as everybody. But
Yeah. Yeah.
one thing that people say is I met this one gal, much older, right? Wiser person. And she always had a saying of, whenever she got irritated or triggered, which seeming on the surface, she always seemed like a calm person, but it was probably because she had these tactics built up over the
Mhm.
years. She always asked herself, "Is what is my ego doing?" right? And she'd always be aware of what her ego was doing in a circumstance.
That's a really good habit to be implementing. Yeah. Always asking yourself, yeah, what could I be missing here? Because yeah, I think for most of us, our brains will default to the easiest way, right? And that is your ego's there actually to protect you, right? But it's not there to give you enlightenment. It's not there to really help you grow, whether it's spiritually, emotionally. It's there just to keep you safe. And oftentimes, the quickest way to keep you safe is the very thing that actually you should not be doing if you're looking for like, long-term growth.
An event happens, whether it's loss or a win,
Yeah.
but it's what are the stories that you associated with that is what
Yeah.
important. And those
Yeah.
stories can be fabricated by your ego.
Another opportunity when say like an economic downturn or investment loss happens is you can also learn a lot about yourself. Right? So I think in one or more of our previous episodes, we talked about this model of the five elements, right? Which to review, most, if not all of us, like we're dominant in one or two of these elements, right? So for example, if you're wood dominant, you might have a tendency to be impulsive, right? You're an action taker. So a lot of entrepreneurs actually fall in this category. So when you suffer a loss, your immediate instinct is, hey, I want to win it back, right? So that can actually lead you to take bigger risks because you feel restless, right? Like you just want to move forward, right? If you're fire dominant, you're very uncomfortable being uncomfortable, right? And again, this can lead you to move on too fast and you might want to just jump to the next shiny deal. If you're earth dominant, you can tend to have a tendency to overthink. You can hesitate, worry about letting other people down, right? Especially if you see yourself as like a provider or a nurturer. If you're metal, you can sometimes be too perfectionistic. These are the people who can ruminate a lot. You can get stuck in this loop, like replaying your mistakes and really focusing on the mistakes. And then you can just get stuck in this cycle and be just really hard on yourself. And if you're a water dominant person, you tend to catastrophize. These are the people that can really be stuck in prolonged depression, something we talked about at the beginning of this episode. Just imagining the worst case scenarios and feeling paralyzed. And now with this experience, you actually feel more paralyzed. And this can oftentimes lead you to not want to take any more risks in the future.
So the first two are can be too hasty.
Mhm.
Bottom three are frozen and
These are like the fight and flight responses, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Some people freeze. Some people, hey, like they just want to like fight to get back what they lost. Like they just want to get right after the next deal without actually pausing to think, okay, what's really like the best thing to do here? Yeah. So again, you don't want to be like on either extreme, like too impulsive, too restless, but you also don't want to be just completely mired in paralysis and just like being so hard on yourself that you're not able to move on. Yeah.
so you don't want to be any of these then, but
But
challenge your tendency.
exactly. If you know what your sort of tendencies are, then you can be able to recognize, okay, if you know that, for example, you're a wood person, which, for example, like that's my element. So I have to remind myself, for example, that, hey, I get restless. Like always feel like I have to be doing something. But I have to remind myself, okay, that's not always a good thing. Take a breath, take a pauser. Yeah, like sleep on it. And don't be too impulsive and just jump on things.
Does this happen in like sports? I don't know if you play like soccer and somebody steals the ball from you and you get
Oh
kind of
yeah.
pissed off for a little bit and you go, let me go get that back. Is that
Oh yeah, yeah. I
like,
say you see this for example, like it reminds me of basketball, right? Like someone gets the ball stolen away, and then well, I feel like more often times than not, then they're chasing the person who stole the ball away, and then they inevitably foul the person
yeah.
who's just running down the court for the easy layup or the dunk. When the smart thing to do is just let it go, just give up the 2 points and focus on the next possession. But how often do we see them just react impulsively, and then they end up fouling, and now the person has an easy dunk and gets a foul shot. So
Unless you're a 40-year-old Michael Jordan who sprints
yeah,
back and gets a
yeah,
two-handed block on the
yeah,
backboard, right?
yeah, yeah,
But then
yeah.
maybe that speaks to something of their kind of competitive type A nature, which is top grade athletes and entrepreneurs.
Mm.
Maybe are more on that wood and fire side. Where I think maybe a lot of kids I can see fall in that earth, metal, water
Hmm.
category.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, just I think again, this just speaks to seeing these events as an opportunity to reflect on yourself, to see what your tendencies are, and ultimately, like stuff like this, it's a great opportunity to actually learn more about yourself. And also, it's important to recognize that like your reaction to loss isn't a personal failure. It's just that we all handle setbacks in a different way, and just it's just important to become aware of this because understanding yourself is actually the first step in regaining clarity.
Yeah, and what came to mind is like golf, right? You
Mm,
never hit it completely straight down the middle of the fairway. There's always some curve to it or a
mm,
little bit left center.
yeah,
People who play enough, who shoot at least 90, know that they have a tendency for a slice or a hook.
yeah,
And they're looking out for that slice. And they when they know that starts to happen, they adjust accordingly.
yeah,
The wood people like you know that you need to slow down a little bit in the
yeah,
beginning there because you might get impulsive. Other people may have a tendency to freeze, so they need to pull themselves out of the mud a little bit. But
yeah.
I think that's just the evolution and the growth of a person, right? You and I stay away from spirituality and religion, right?
Mm,
That's kind of the whole Taoist point of view where you're just on this earth to gain wisdom and learn
mhm.
about yourself in these types of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And what better way to learn about yourself than to go through stress? Because ultimately, it's the stress and difficulties in life that actually make us resilient and tough.
Yeah, there's no other way to learn,
Yeah,
unfortunately, right?
unfortunately, no.
Unless your parents are good enough at or somehow able to engineer stresses and failures, there's no way to learn
Yeah,
what you're doing now.
yeah. But it's so hard to see it when you're actually going through the stress. And I'm not immune from this either, but it's really hard. And I just want people to know that like it's you're definitely not alone.
Yeah, I think like speaking for myself, I did have an easier time than most because I was surrounded by so many people in the same situation that everybody all unconnected were going to the same thing and we had people just to talk it out
Hmm.
with. Whereas if you don't have that type of social connection, you may not want to talk to your spouse about them because they'll divorce you. Let's put it so I get it. So the best option keep it inside and keep the status quo, but that's going to kill you from a emotional standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having, and we've talked about this on a bunch of our previous episodes, but having your tribe, having people that you can talk to that really have your back, they're actually looking out for you, who won't judge, that's gold, right? And especially people who have more life experience, who let's say have experienced downturns and major setbacks, but have rebounded and pulled themselves back up to really succeed. There's a relationship with someone like that, that's gold, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to staying in an echo chamber with other folks who didn't rise to that challenge yet, right? Or other folks who have a tendency to blame others, right? And there's a place and time for that, but I've found that in my personal experience, hanging out too long in this space, it's not productive, right? It might soothe the ego, but it actually doesn't help you move forward.
One thing that helped me, one day I'll thank this person if I ever get a chance, but entrepreneurs go through ups and downs, and some people who are entrepreneurs say, look, I don't know what's going on in your head. We don't need to talk about it, but just know that I was there at one time going through the same thing. The sun will come out tomorrow. You're going to have to go and face your own demons. But just hearing that somebody else went through the same exact thing and is empathizing and come out the other end, I think is big. And again,
Yeah.
you may not have those people around you to say those types of things. They also said, don't drink when you're alone too. That'll make it worse as a half joke. But
Yeah.
you start to realize like the stuff that we talk about on this podcast is it's the gold, right? It's what totally separates people out there are sinking or swimming. They have these types of operating system, or I call it software. You can get so much more out of yourself if you have these software programmed into it. And
Yeah.
your hardware is how intense can you work? How quickly can you read? How critical thinking and things you can get done? How tall you are in sports. But we do have impact over our situation with the software that we put into our minds with this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I want to talk a little bit about the things you can do after suffering a loss. We've talked about the importance of talking to people who won't judge, people who are neutral.
I don't highlight what you
Yeah.
said there because
Yeah.
I don't think we push it home,
Mm.
but you are mentioning also being wary of hanging out with people who also verify maybe the bad things you don't want. Again, the situation where the friend comes home, always dates bad guys, and to confirm that, right?
Yeah.
If you're that person who's in that situation consoling a friend, you may or may not want to totally jump on their bandwagon because that could
Hmm.
also be bad too. But sometimes people like to stay in this self-confirming echo chamber where people are also in the same law situation and you start to stir the pot. This is very similar to employees in the lunchroom when you're just stirring shit up. The union
Yeah.
just stirring shit up. And it's not even stuff that's true. And we all know this. We all joke about this, right? Because employees like to just stir shit up all the time. But it's the same element at play here. And so it's important to be cognizant of that too. Not just to
Yeah.
be around other people, just to be around other people, but be cognizant of the messages that you're taking in.
Yeah. It's so important, I think, who you surround yourself with. I think as you're talking about that, it reminds me of this, I think it's a statistic. I have to double check, make sure it's true, but and you might have heard this too, but then I think the statistic deals with they looked at like the rate of divorce in women who are still married, and they found those who are most likely to end up divorcing were the ones who hung out with friends who were also divorced. I'll let our listeners like take away from them what they want, but yeah, it just reminded me of that. Yeah, it is. I think along the same lines of what you're talking about. It is really important to surround yourself with the right people, and that has to be intentional. I think sometimes we have to take a step back and be like, hey, is this what I need? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And again, I think comes back to keep the ball in the middle of the fairway.
yeah,
If you're somebody like the divorce party group, if you're
yeah,
somebody heading down that road, maybe consciously find yourself around a group that has that other mentality to guide yourself back
yeah,
as opposed to going to the bushes on that side.
yeah.
And in this situation, if you're somebody who has the emotional reaction of depression, getting beat down on yourself, get around people who can bring you back the other
Mm,
way. So it's self-awareness of which side of the fairway you're on and bring yourself back with the right people or some of these other tools. But try not to keep going into the rough on the left or the right.
I've remembered in my own past where I had to make a difficult choice of intentionally really limiting my time to certain friends who I thought they tended to be a little bit negative, right? They were a little bit more risk averse. They had certain limiting beliefs at a time in my life when I was looking to make major changes, like whether it's like uprooting our family to move to the other side of the continent or start up a new business venture. I knew that the voices of those I surround myself with actually can have a huge impact, right? And so I had to make that intentional decision to surround myself and to read books, listen to podcasts, and do seminars where I would meet people who could help me share that similar mindset in helping me get to where I needed to go at that time. Because the reality is, most of us were very influenced by the people we hang around with. We're very easily influenced by those who we surround ourselves with. Yeah. And so I think it's actually important to recognize that. So you actually, which can be a helpful thing because if you recognize that, then by choosing to surround yourself with the people you want to emulate, then you're actually more likely to become like those people.
And negative people, if you recognize it, get away from them right away. I think that's never a way to
Hmm.
go for sure. What's troubling about negative people is they always talk crap about other people, and on the surface, they seem so cool. When you
Yeah.
stop and take light of the situation, you quickly realize the toxicity
Yeah.
of it all.
Yeah.
This also made me think about like coaches, right? Like I
Hmm.
use a coach, and now that I think about it, my coaches are always like one-sided typically. I know which way they're gonna
Yeah.
influence the golf ball in
Hmm.
flight in a way. I've never really interacted with a coach that can self-regulate and see where I'm at and guide me the right way I need to go. But maybe that's a master coach in
Hmm.
itself. But if you don't have a coach out there, get one. But if you can't pay for one or you don't think it's worth it, then unfortunately you have to self-correct on your
Yeah.
own and understand where you are, self-awareness, which is easier said than goes.
Yeah, because it's really hard to see our blind spots. And I think this is where having a neutral third party, someone who won't judge, who can see things more objectively, is immensely valuable. And that's difficult, right? Especially if finances might be tough or you're not sure if it's worth the investment. It's very easy to convince yourself, oh, like I got it. I don't need someone to tell me these things. I can figure it out on my own. But that's the funny thing. That was like, we don't know what we don't know. And then that's the value of having somebody who has a different set of eyes, who has maybe some overlap in life experiences, but also very different ones that can see things from a different angle. Right? So whether that's a coach, a mentor, a counselor, or like another seasoned investor who has gone through all the different seasons, someone that can really help you to steady your shot, right? To help you steer you back to the way that you want to go. And it's
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of those people, unless you pay them, a lot of these people are much more evolved as investors and also people from a personal development standpoint. Their hourly rate is just way too expensive. So if you're ever so lucky to get any advice in a way, like I know I've been in this situation luckily, and the advice that I get is so short and quick
Mm,
and not really thoughtful, but it's so insightful if we really start to think about it. One guy literally, he's been through like 3 or 4 of these market cycles, basically told me, turn off the phone, don't talk to anybody, just put your head down, come
mm,
back in 4 years. And everybody else made the same mistakes, the institutions made the same mistakes. Just that's just part of the game.
yeah,
And he was right. He was
yeah,
right. I needed to go to the journey
mm,
myself. But
yeah,
it's funny, like even him who's been through it and maybe even going through it again, because it hits everybody. Sometimes you forget when you went through the lesson 12 years ago or 8 years ago.
yeah.
So I think that's what's difficult. You may work with a coach. They may have the same exact experience, but they may have a lot of distance has been put between that and the painful
Mm,
moment that they may not be able to lead you through the forest. If you got lost in the forest, Paul, and I got lost too, I'd probably be able to get you out, maybe. But the forests in the past have changed
hmm.
potentially. Ultimately, everybody's on their own journey, getting themselves lost out of the forest.
It's like a guide is very useful, but ultimately, yeah, it is. There is an element, a very strong element of having to walk your own journey to figure things out, and it's not an easy journey. But that's why we have groups like the ones that we're in, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we're still. I think you and I were. I think I know we're still learning ourselves, but yeah, I mean, we definitely enjoy and value working with other folks and helping to share knowledge and experience.
This is a journey I'm on myself, but we all talk about if you were to still down, what is the goal for your kids? A lot of people will say, I just want them to be happy. Some will say, I want them to be doctors. But I think if I were to distill it down, I would say, I want them to have the confidence that things are out of their control are going to happen to them and that they can, the gauges are going to be out in the airplane. But I want them to have the confidence they can guide themselves lost to the jungle and get out and being able to course correct as they're heading one way too much and then the other way too much. Just have the confidence to be able to do that. Unfortunately, if you don't get lost in the jungle, you never
Mhm.
get those skill sets through it.
One of the things I hope to pass on to my kids is resiliency. 'Cause a lot of times you can do everything right, you can try your hardest, but yeah, you're gonna come up short because you can't always control what happens on the outside. My kids are both in like this very competitive swim club, and I think what we're talking about just reminds me of how cruel the sport can be. So even at such a young age, they're realizing that hey, they can be putting in the work, the training, the long hours, and you could literally lose the difference between making the podium and not can be like 1/100th of a second, right? Less than the blink of an eye. But that's life, unfortunately. You could do everything right, try your hardest, but you still sometimes come up short. Yeah. And then, how to bounce back from that, but and keep going and just trusting the process that, hey, as long as progress is never linear, right? It's never linear that you can never predict it. Yeah. So I feel, yeah, I feel like just watching their journey, I actually see a lot of parallels to what adults go through, to what investors go through, right? Yeah. Sometimes you don't see like the real trajectory until much later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe to like transition here a bit. So you wrote a great article on this, and I wanted to go through each. A lot of these techniques are more for acute. I think a lot up to this point, we've talked a little bit of more how do we deal with these things chronically? Some of these things you may take years to work through. Some people never get over it. But part of this is like the short-term acute techniques to get you to tomorrow
Yeah, yeah,
without going way too one way, getting angry, blaming others, and then the other way, which is getting depressed, right?
yeah,
Maybe even
yeah,
worse. I think that the first thing, maybe we can pass these back and forth here,
yeah,
just reading down your list.
yeah.
Pause the emotional reaction before the spiral begins to take over. So a lot of this is having I do this myself, right? You get into the over catastrophizing moment. Oh no, I'll have to work for another 20 years, or oh no, it's all over. The
Yeah.
catastrophizing
Yeah.
thing. Some techniques here, the 72-hour cooling period, no major decisions, and then labeling the emotion that you're feeling, just to call it out as not
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
own. It is
Yeah.
you, your
Yeah.
emotions, but it's not really your fault. It's just natural things that are happening.
Yeah. Research has shown that just simply labeling your emotions, for example, saying, I'm angry, I feel ashamed, I feel overwhelmed, just that simple act actually reduces the amygdala activation, right? And the amygdala, that's the part that gets fired up when we're being emotional, right? But just naming the emotion helps to cool things off, and that'll allow you to think more rationally and be more cool-headed. If you're in them, this is for the acute phase, but you can do some grounding techniques, right? Whether it's slow breathing or just going outside for a walk. For some people, they like to have a little bit of cold water exposure. All these things can help to reset the stress response. Because what we do know is that if you're angry, if you're in this fight or flight mode, there's a very high chance that you're going to make decisions that your future self is going to regret because you just can't think clearly when you're in fight or flight mode.
So maybe take us these next two techniques,
Mm,
break the loop of people going one way or the other. So maybe take the example of the individual who is in great shame,
yeah,
beating
yeah.
themselves up. What should those people do in the acute
Yeah.
stage?
So oftentimes shame, that's the real enemy here. It's not the actual financial loss. A lot of high achievers, high performers, they oftentimes retreat because deep down they feel, like people think I'm going to look stupid or I should have known better. How could I have done this? Or this makes me look irresponsible. Right? What are people going to think of me? So what really helps in these types of situation is like we talked about, talk to somebody who won't judge you. Say it out loud that hey, losses happen to every serious investor, right? They do, right? And normalize it because every major investor, fund, syndicator has had losses if they've been in the game long enough. That's the reality. We all know about market cycles, right? That's just how things work. And yeah, sometimes we get unlucky, right? But shame oftentimes thrives in silence. And when we sit in shame, it actually amplifies our anxiety. It kills our creativity and it ultimately prevents learning. Learning is what you need to grow forward.
Yeah, so I'm saying this sarcastically. If you work a job where you just clock in and out and just need to press a button all day
Mhm.
long and you don't need to be creative, then by all means, just stay in the dumps. But if that's not you, you
No.
got to do something about it. And in the short term, just, yeah, acknowledging that this is a natural thing that you're going
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
And next set of strategies is made for the person who takes the other
Hmm.
approach, the firecracker who gets angry, yells and screams, and blames other people. I think this is where the fact finding search goes the other way. Why did the market go down 20%? Because somebody else picked the wrong time to do it.
Yeah.
We all did.
Hmm.
Everybody did in the world, yourself included.
Yeah.
Some people cling on to the fact. Again, it's the ego pointing them in trying to protect itself. So some questions asked, what was in my control, what wasn't? Some things were in your control, but market shifts, debt markets freeze, changes in the law, wars outside the country.
Yeah. Pandemics, right?
Yeah, that was as a business owner. I had friends who had restaurants, and I'm like, man, my heart just goes out to you
Hmm.
guys. How horrible is it that restaurants can't be in business?
Yeah.
It's horrible. Certain things outside of control, and then what assumptions were wrong. In commercial real estate, you always try to be assuming that the market is going to be not getting stronger. At some point, your models crack, right? And what
Hmm.
we saw was the markets being 3 to 4 times as hard as what it was able to happen. Essentially, you build a sandbag wall for 10 feet up in the air for the
Yeah.
hurricane to come because you know it's coming, but you got hit with a 30-foot wave. What are the facts and other red flags did I miss or did I dismiss? Or maybe you're one of these people who sat out 2008 to 2014 because you didn't have the conviction of investing and jumped into it in 2021 when they're at the top of the market, right? Maybe you're somebody who's gone through it twice, but typically you see people who go through couple downs, you see them a lot more resilient by the second time. So if this is your first one, don't be so hard on yourself. And then
Yeah.
the last thing to ask is what worked? What in the strategy was working until that one single point of failure, multiple points of failure broke? Because that's where you can start to extract some lessons learned and become a better investor, become improved from it, as opposed to just saying, F, it's everybody else's fault.
The next thing we could talk about is how to the importance of rebuilding psychological safety before you actually rebuild your strategy. Again, because you can't think clearly while your identity feels threatened. And this is where we talk about the importance of the language that we use when we talk to ourselves. So, for example, replaced quote unquote I failed with, hey, I learned something that will actually make me a stronger investor in the future.
Yeah. And it's not, oh, I learned something. Never
Mhm.
work with that a-hole again. That's
Yes.
not what we're looking for here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, to going back to the just having a balanced view and just take responsibility for when appropriate, because ultimately that is the more empowering approach. Because whenever we place all the blame on others, that's actually very disempowering. It means actually you have no agency to choose your road in life. So yeah, going back to the importance of being mindful of the way that we talk to ourselves, these types of like self-compassion techniques, these have all actually been validated in neuroscience research. How we talk to ourselves actually has like a huge bearing on whether or not we're successful or not, whether or not we have happy relationships. And
Can I just say a couple of things that came
yeah.
to mind? We
Mm.
talk about relationships, resolution a lot. A couple of similarities I'm seeing in this is when you fight with your spouse,
Mm.
supposed to go over the facts on what happened. Similar parallel here. And then
Yeah.
secondly, if you're in a state of depression, you're not thinking creatively. And that's why they say when you fight to take a break because you're not in that state to think creatively. Because you and your spouse have to work to get resolution. You need to be freaking creative
Yeah.
in this case
Yeah.
because it is a zero sum game, if not. But a lot of similarities, I think, here.
Indeed, yes. You want to have these discussions when your both of your nervous systems are regulated, because nothing good comes out of a dysregulated nervous system. There's a lot of overlap. We want to be able to think with the more evolved parts of our brain, because that is what's going to lead us to growth and ultimate fulfillment. But yeah, so just like with when we're discussing it with a partner or spouse, yeah, share the facts without catastrophizing. Own your role without over owning, or on the other end of the spectrum, like over blaming. You don't want to be blaming, you also don't want to be defensive. And ultimately, the goal is to really collaborate on a plan forward. And when we're talking about our investing identity, a loss can temporarily shake the belief that, hey, I make smart decisions. So rebuild it by reminding yourself that, hey, again, smart investors experience losses. The most experienced investors have experienced great losses. Remind yourself that systems fail, not identities. And what happened is just one point in time. It's one data point. It is not your destiny. Use empowering language like this for yourself instead of, hey, I failed or let others down. Yeah.
Or a common overused label is, oh, I got greedy. Yeah, I think that's a too easy of a label to put on this sometimes that
Yeah.
people just use as a catch-all.
Yeah.
In reality, maybe you just overextended yourself in a small time period, right? That's why they
Hmm.
say dollar cost average or spread it out
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
But you just is the person who doubles down on blackjack when they have a good hand, is that greedy? Not really when you look at it from a
Hmm.
certain angle. So maybe that's a case of I could see both sides doing that, right? The person who likes to beat themselves up, they just like to label them a horrible label, like being
Yeah.
greedy. And then the person who just likes to shove things off to not take accountability, just label it like a false label that really doesn't
Yeah.
get into the root, like what you were saying earlier, Paul, like what were you thinking at that time? What was the
Hmm.
internal dialogue
Yeah.
so that we don't make this, we can make smarter decisions in the future. Because in the next time, the situation will not happen again. It'll always be something else. So it's always better that we understand what the mechanisms we came because we will not get tested with the same exact thing in the future.
Hmm.
The next barrier we come to, the next fall point, inevitably will be very different. It will not be a housing crisis like it was in
Yeah.
2008. It will not be an interest rate spike of 40 years like it was in
Yeah.
2022.
Right.
It'll always be something different. I think
That's
like using that label is a cop out. Like people use it in these
yeah.
situations. And
Yeah, and the whole point of it being resilient is that you can be adaptable to different types of stresses because it's highly unlikely that you're going to face the exact same stress again. Yeah, so being resilient also means being highly adaptable for whatever next curveball that life throws at you. And next, I think we could talk a bit about how to reset your strategy using clarity and not fear. Because again, fear-based decisions will more likely create future losses, but clarity-based decisions create longevity. Right? So after a setback and after going through these steps, then you might want to actually reevaluate your actual risk tolerance because your emotional tolerance might actually differ from your intellectual assumptions. You also want to think about diversifying with intention. Do an analysis of what you were doing before. Did you diversify across different asset classes, geography, timelines, like operator types? Take stock of what you did. Be objective, right? You also want to maybe think about your personal guardrails again, right? I think one example is, hey, like what's the max percent of my net worth that goes into any single deal? And I know in the past, Lane, like you've talked about this a lot. Don't put like all your eggs into any one deal. Spread them out, right? Things like minimum liquidity reserves, must-haves for underwriting, like set your own boundaries, right? Review your red flags, like what are your no-goes,
this
right?
is like the list that people should write when they get out of a relationship, what their spouse should be next time.
And then think about like what are your investing filters, right? What will you never compromise on again, and what aligns with your worldview? Ask yourself, do I need to strengthen my due diligence rituals? And then lastly, we talked about this before. Check your own predominant elements blind spot, right? For example, I'm wood, so hey, I might need to ask myself, hey, do I need to slow down here? If you're more of a fire element, like you might want to remind yourself, hey, like, don't get seduced by hype and salesmanship. Right? If you're an earth type, tell yourself, hey, I avoid analysis paralysis. Like at some point, make a decision. If you're metal,
What's sorry to interrupt, but I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah.
What do you think I am? Like, it's a trick question, right? Because you're not in my head, but I'm just a test here. From your vantage point, what do you think I am?
I think I could be wrong, but I think you have a very strong wood element. But I'm curious to see what.
Yeah, that's an easy one though for an entrepreneur though, right? Yeah. I don't know, it was a trick question because it's you see what's on the out exterior and you might see my blind spots, but still you don't know what's going on in my
Yeah,
head or maybe I
yeah,
overcompensate for something, but I don't know. You're probably right because none of these others.
yeah,
I have gratitude that I'm not, I tend to beat myself up a lot less than the average person.
yeah,
And I guess I have sympathy for people who it's hard if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
inclined to be the other.
Correct. Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, so it's just finishing up the elements here. So if you're metal, you might need to remind yourself, okay, stop replaying mistakes endlessly. And if you're water elements, you probably need to remind yourself, okay, avoid catastrophizing and overthinking worst case disaster scenarios. And again, all this just speaks to like understanding ourselves. Because once you understand yourselves, then you're just able to make better decisions. Because in a way, you know your weaknesses and your blind spots. And you also know your strengths too. And then once you're regulated and clear, then you can step back in. You can do it gradually and deliberately. Possible ways that you can re-engage is, for example, starting with a smaller deal to build your confidence, surrounding yourself with grounded, wise investors, reconnect with your long-term vision again. And then track your behavior and not just track your financial returns. I think we talked about how you do emotionally is just as important as how you do on the spreadsheet. Yeah.
I think this comeback phase is very important to do this as quick as possible. If you're thinking like your sports analogy where
Mm,
you turn the ball over, you
mm,
get your ass up and get back to the end of the court, right?
yeah.
Time, every second counts, every split second counts. And even in investing, like if you've had losses, more than likely everybody is in the same macroeconomic climate. And that is also the time when there's, as Warren Buffett says, when there's fear in the streets and there's carnage, that's the best time to invest when everything's lower. You don't want to be that person who, like, some people say, so and so asset class has been beat up the last few years. Like, that's the time when you want to invest, dude.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're still picking yourself off the ground emotionally, you're going to miss out on the bounce off the bottom. So I think every second counts. It is a very competitive world out there. it is actually more important to pick yourself off the ground for those reasons, unless you stand to be that person who picks themselves up in 2032, and then it's at the peak of the market again, buddy.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, I've talked to a lot of people. I have intro calls with a lot of folks. It doesn't come up too often, but it comes up a lot. A very common situation where somebody says, well, yeah, I used to invest back in 2006, and then I got
Mm.
blown out of the market. I literally like either bankrupt or couldn't get any mortgages. And then they come back 10 years later when they financially and emotionally recover. And by that time, you're in the peak of the market.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of actually endurance sports, which I think some of our listeners may remember. I'm into things like triathlons and marathons, and I'm training for an Ironman now. But I think there's a lot of similarities between endurance sports and investing because and those who do endurance sports, they'll know that, hey, you have some like really bad race days. Sometimes you have like equipment failures if you're doing a triathlon. Sometimes your knee will flare up or you get injured. Those who do the best, like they're the ones who don't quit the sport when they have a bad race, right? Like you go back, you look at the data, you adapt, you analyze, you reset, and get back to training, and then have another go. And ultimately, the athlete who wins is the one who stays in the game. And in many ways, investing is no different, right? Like you have to pace yourself, you have to adapt. Don't panic when the conditions change, and take the bird's eye view. Focus on the trajectory, not short-term time frames.
To sum things up, maybe just like a longer term perspective, right? It goes to the things that really matter, which is your health, family, relationships, and money. I think some of the better mindsets that have worked is you just keep working. Hopefully the job wasn't too bad for you, or
Mm.
another year in business wasn't too bad, but it could be, it's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
I'll also add that with something definitely not to think. And when you see it creeping up, just stop thinking of it. Just do something else. Is, oh my God, it took me X amount of days, months, minutes, years to save up that money. And now it's
Mm.
gone. Like that is just not gonna, if you wanted to mind F yourself, that is what you
Mm. Yeah.
just, if you just wanted to run the worst marathon, you just talk negative thoughts all the
Yeah.
time. It's like nobody does that. But people always do this thing where they quantify how bad of a mistake it was. Been there, done that.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, been there, done that, and I've heard a lot of folks say the same things, like, no, no, don't go there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a reason why the subtitle for a podcast is like health, wealth, and happiness, because your financial net worth is it's just one piece of the pie, and arguably is actually not the most important piece when you think about other things like your relationships and your health. And just remember that, hey, your net worth will fluctuate. And for the most financially successful people, their net worths have fluctuated wildly, right? And just know that while your net worth will fluctuate, like your inherent worth will not, right? So a financial loss does not define you, and like a setback is just one moment in time, and it does not erase your competence or your intelligence. And most importantly, anyone who's been in the game long enough is going to go through this. And when you go through this, realize that you're not alone. Right? A lot of successful people have gone through something similar, if not worse. You know, yeah, you have a choice to make, right? Do you let this moment in time, do you let this downturn define you, or do you use it as a potential turning point, a shift towards being wiser, being calmer, and just more aligned with who you want to be? Could this be the moment that actually springboards you to something even greater? Yeah, because you're still writing your own story, and how are you going to write that ending? And that's up to you.
We talked a lot about stuff on today. If something triggers in you like an emotion, do something about it. Take that emotion and have a productive conversation with it. I would say book a call with Paul. It might be a good starting point to get into the world of being professionally coached along, because I think once you start and see the results, there is no turning back.
Yeah.
You stop going through and fighting your own problems alone. You stop doing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe that's the gift, right? It got so bad in my head that I just needed some help. And that it got so bad. And I'm so glad it did, because it finally found a new path for. Yeah.
Yeah. Said.
All right. Good podcast.